So we looked at the association between moving from a low to a high walkability neighborhood and the incidence of hypertension or high blood pressure. We've always, at some point in our lives, had to make the decision of where to move, right? What neighborhood to choose for either your kids or your family or for yourself. And so the hot topic nowadays has been the walk score and walkability of your neighborhood. And so I was very interested to see whether there is scientific evidence that highly walkable neighborhoods indeed impacts your health. So in the past, this evidence has been based on cross-sectional design. So for example, people were in their neighborhood already, and then they were asked whether or not they were obese or had diabetes. But as you can imagine, you know, people who choose to live in a highly walkable neighborhood versus people who choose to live in a low walkable neighborhood differ in many characteristics in terms of income. They might be different educational status, marital status, etc., that might influence their high blood pressure risk. So in this study, what we did was we balanced for all of these factors that could potentially explain the huge difference that we found. And after balancing all of those or matching on these various characteristics, we found that 54% reduced risk. So, you know, this is independent of any socioeconomic or even lifestyle factors. So it's purely the environment that they were living in. So what we found was quite startling. What we found was people who moved from a low to a highly walkable neighborhood had a 54% reduction in their risk of high blood pressure than compared to those who moved from a low to a low walkable neighborhood. So to put it in perspective, the incidence of hypertension over the 10-year period that we looked at was 9% among those who moved to a highly walkable neighborhood, and 18% among those who moved to a low walkable neighborhood. So twice as many people developed hypertension in the low to low group than the low to high mover group. There are many walkability indices out there, but the one that we decided to use was Walk Score. So Walk Score is one of the only open access walkability indices that are available to almost anyone who can go into walkscore.com and find their walkability index for their neighborhood. So we decided to use that because it's widely available for all zip codes and postal codes in Canada, the US, and in Australia. I think the message has to go out to city planners because the evidence is so strong that highly walkable neighborhoods does improve your cardiovascular health. So for city planners to maybe encourage them to build neighborhoods that are more pedestrian friendly and have people rely less on their cars. And I think for the individuals who are currently living in a low walkable neighborhood, I think the message has to be that this association is found because people living in walkable neighborhoods actually spend that extra 10 minutes or extra 15 minutes walking to the school or walking to the bank or walking to the park. And I think everyone can incorporate this type of active transport, meaning using your feet to get to places as opposed to depending on your car all the time. Not to say we should never buy a car, not to say we should abandon our car. You know, no one would expect anyone to walk an hour to get their groceries, an hour to come back. But it's those little tweaks in your life that you can make. Park a little further away from the mall and walk that extra 10 minutes. It makes a world of a difference. I think there's several aspects to what the built environment and neighborhood characteristics are, right? So there's aspects of walkability, meaning, you know, are the streets conducive to walking, meaning connected and short intersections. But there's also the safety aspect, right? Is your neighborhood safe to walk in at night? Is your neighborhood safe for your kids to walk in? Also the aesthetics. How aesthetically pleasing is it to walk around, right? Being able to see nice trees and, you know, is better than seeing traffic and traffic jams. So I think all of these need to be taken into consideration when planning neighborhoods. I think the next step will be to look at the other part of the equation. So there's this huge obesity crisis, and one part of the equation is physical activity. The other part of the equation is the food. So yes, these neighborhoods might be walkable, but are they also equally good in terms of access to healthy foods? So does it mean that you're able to walk to the nearest restaurant that happens to be a fast food chain? Probably that's not optimal. Sure. So it's a matter of what choices people have in terms of their food environment in addition to their walkability environment. So for many, many decades, the public health efforts have focused on the individual, so forcing the individual to make that choice. And now we're realizing that that might not be the most sustainable and the single method that's going to work, because obesity rates are rising, diabetes rates are rising, hypertension is still one of the top risk factors of cardiovascular disease. So really the message has to be that everyone needs to incorporate some physical activity in their lives, that it will benefit them, and also to build the environment so that you set people up for success. That walking becomes the obvious choice, right? Instead of starting your car and it takes 5 minutes to warm up, and driving for 5 minutes and then finding parking might take some time. Incorporate all of that in your decision making, and think that an extra 10 minutes a day is really not that much more in your daily routine.